Morning, morning. If you checked out our Just the Tip Tuesday, then you are probably here because I said I was going to expand on some of the points that I made over there. So I'm going to do that right now. So the first one that we had was education. Obviously, right, that's a mainstay in our society, and so that's seen as very important, but a lot of people don't really analyze why that's important. And we're finding out more and more about education. Psychologists are finding out more and more about education as we roll into this new positive psychology field, which is really the flip side. Instead of trying to remove mental illness, you're trying to bolster mental health. So you're trying to just make the good things better. And so one of the things that education does is it really helps you stave off depression and avoid depression. Something that an experiment that was done by Dr. Martin Seligman was they took the researchers took dogs and had them in cages, and it was obviously animal testing, and so it's going to be borderline inhumane. But either way, they took them and put them in this cage, and one of the groups had an electric shock on the floor that they would receive, and they could do nothing about it. And then another group was able to shut off this electric shock, but with a press of the nose. They would press their nose to a button, and then that would shut off the electric shock. And then there was a control group that got nothing at all. They just sat in this little cage. And what they did was they took this group and put them through a round of experimentation. They would shock the group that would get shocked, and then let the other group find their way out of the situation, right, by pressing that button. And then they took and redid this experiment where they gave the group that couldn't escape the shock last time, they gave them a way out. They were able to jump over this barrier, and then they could, just not get shocked anymore. And then all three groups were able to do that now. So the control group, as well as the group that could remove the shock in the original part of the experiment. And so what would happen, though, is the group that did receive the shock, that had no control over it whatsoever, they had been conditioned to be helpless. And so that's the big word there, right, is the key word is helpless in this experiment, because they had just been so conditioned to just receive the shock and not do anything about it that even when given the opportunity, they wouldn't take it. They would not get out of the shock because they just didn't know any better in their own mind. And so the same thing happens with people. We didn't use electric shocks, right? People didn't use electric shocks to shock each other. That's unethical. But they did use really high-pitched ringing noises that were pretty uncomfortable, and they found generally the same results, that when you put somebody in a room and with a really loud noise and give them their way out, they would be conditioned to not find a way out. So, that being said, right, a lot of you that are unemployed right now might feel kind of helpless, like you're having no utility, and that's, not a very good feeling, and that can, in and of itself, lead to depression. In the absence of a direction, we tend to go south. We tend to go negative. So if you're not setting a positive trajectory for yourself, you're really steering yourself the other way just by inaction, just by not doing anything. So you gotta do something to move in the right direction here. The right direction being just well-being and health in general, mental health included. So, by picking an education plan, picking a direction to go in with your education, while you have the time, you're going to really stave off some of that depression. There is a part of the brain that gets flipped on when we start to challenge ourselves to learn new information, right? So, part of that experiment was a neurology aspect done years and years later, I think with mice. And what they found was when the mice could learn something new, there was a part of the brain that was turned on, and then that part that normally is like default negative response kind of gets turned off there. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about education, as opposed to thinking about it as like, oh, I have to learn because I have time. It's like, no, dude, like, your future self will thank you for sure, 100%. And so utilize your resources. We got the internet, right? When this happened 100 years ago, when there was a pandemic and people were stuck in their homes, and potentially a lot more people dying. I don't really know the numbers, and we don't even know the numbers right now anyway, but use your resources. You got the internet and you have a whole digital network at your disposal. Use that wisely. There is no reason that we shouldn't be if you have an internet connection. There are a lot of people that don't, right? Like people in impoverished communities, they're probably not. They don't have laptops, you know. Like they're not just chucking them around like they're candy. A lot of people that are stuck in low socioeconomic statuses. They're just stuck in their homes. They got nothing. They have like maybe pencils and paper. And they can like write stuff, but there are definitely people like that out there. And so be thankful if you're not one of them. Yeah. So anyway, and then you're gonna better understand your interests. So that's a really important thing for sure, is understanding your interests. What are you actually interested in, right? Did you take the job that you had because you had no choice and you just got stuck in that rut for like years and years? Or do you actually enjoy it? Maybe you do. How can you further your skills in that interest that you have? Or how can you develop a whole new, subject of expertise that you are genuinely interested in, that you can then use to take out to the workforce later, which leads me into kind of the next point. I guess they all kind of blend together. Breadth over depth. All right, so that's a really important one in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. He talks about 10,000 hour theory, right, and talking about depth, right? How deep can you get into a subject or a field or a skill, and how that's going to improve, and it's not that it's not going to improve your ability in that field or skill, right? It will, but there is something to be said about breadth over depth as well, right? So when we can jump from domain to domain, right? So being able to create analogies, and that is what this is, analogous thinking, right? Being able to apply information from one domain and being able to apply it to another domain, right? So let's say, for example, you could use anatomy and physiology, right, as an exercise coach. You can create some analogous thoughts, right? Some thoughts that some structures that you can find in anatomy and physiology that could be applied to, let's say, auto mechanics or something like that. Now, obviously, it's not going to be like clean cut, right? Because they're not the same thing. But generally, you can find patterns and trends across multiple domains, and so this breadth over depth concept is definitely very important. I think underlooked and underutilized. So get some breadth, right? Really expand your knowledge base and start to move out laterally as opposed to just deep diving down this one topic. We can tend to get a very narrow mindset at that point, and we don't see outside of our walls, right? And then prepare yourself for the job market, right? So things are changing. Surprise, right? Things are changing really, really fast. And so we definitely need to keep an eye out, pay attention, and see what's going on in the world, see what needs to be done, right? What needs to be done? What problems are there out in the world that we can resolve? I know that, again, like I said earlier, impoverished communities not having laptops, that's a big problem, right? So the education gap that was already there is now going to be expanded even more. So those in low socioeconomic statuses they're not going to be able to be educated depending on how long we're in here for, right? We're in this quarantine period for. So let's say, for example, they're all the way till the end of the school year. They don't go back to school at all, right? And there's no way for them to learn at home because there's no laptop, maybe no internet connection even. I don't know. Right, so now it's June, July timeframe, and they haven't been in school, and they probably won't go back to school until September if they're lucky, right? So if things go back to relatively normal and we go back to brick and mortar and their infrastructure that was in place is then usable, right? So the affluent communities are able to adapt and continue learning throughout this 6 to 8 months potentially. And the non-affluent communities are not. So that's a problem that is, going to create a need in the market, in our society, and there is definitely more than enough people to help tackle that problem. But we have to be prepared to do so, right? We have to have the right skill sets in place. We have to have the right perspective in place. In order to be able to accomplish these things. So that's just one example. There's definitely a lot of other things going on in the world right now that people can help out with, right? And so use your interests and your skill sets, your current skill sets and the ones you're going to develop to your advantage so that you can help the people around you. Because that's really, I mean, what else is there to do, right? Take care.